What's happening, financial coaches? Peter here. I want to hit you up with my tip. This is my golden tip for doing presentations. I do a lot of presentations, and I will say that this isn't necessarily one I do now. And this is probably because of the size of the groups that I present to now. But I want to talk and go back in time about when I started. And I think for a lot of you that are watching these videos, you're probably starting out, you're probably trying to figure out the marketing engine for your financial coaching business. And I want to give you a tip and I want to talk about the psychology of it and why it works. And it's not something I did right at the beginning, but it's something that I kind of figured out what I wanted to do. So the wonderful thing about it is, and why I'm very blessed, is that I get to speak to some really big groups. And that's really the reason that I don't necessarily follow this strategy anymore. To the same literal extent that I used to. And it's really just because of the scale of them. But I do try to do some of these things, but in a different way, in a kind of a digital way. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But when you have, say, 1,400 people in the audience, it's just not as practical to do some of these things. But when you're starting out, one of the ways I started out, one of the key ways that I put people on the other side of the desk or on the other end of the phone line was by getting public speaking gigs. And I don't mean glamorous public speaking. I did a little video about this. I would speak anywhere that people would allow me or invite me to. And most of the time I was pitching them. And, sometimes I was volunteering for organizations as like an educational chair or training chair and putting in financial topics because that was obviously my forte. Sometimes I was invited to things. Sometimes I was sending out applications to say, hey, I know you've got this coming up. I would love to have the opportunity to do 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 30 minutes if I could. And the key there is, one, get good at doing presentations. There are a lot of people who think they're good at presentations, but they aren't. And that was always something that worried me. And I was not as good then as I am now. But one of the things that I did, and I would recommend this isn't really the point of this, but it's why I did it and how I learned that it worked, was I always gave a anonymous survey at the end of my presentation. It was just a little half sheet of paper, and it really had 1 through 10, and it was really some just key components like how good was the material in this presentation, 0 to 10. How good was the speaker at presenting the material, 0 to 10. How competent did you feel the speaker was, 0 to 10. Those types of things. And then obviously, big believer in call to action. If you would like to continue this conversation, please reach out to me. Put your contact information here. And that's what I would do. And so I'd get these back. And if you had 20 or 30 people in them, I'd look at them and I'd look at the details, or if people wanted to write comments in it, they could. There was a section for that. And, out of those, out of 25 people, I'd probably get 2 what I call connects. I'd get 2 maybe in-person follow-ups, right? Yes, please reach out to me. I would love to continue to talk about a first-time mortgage, or please reach out to me. I'm working on my credit score. And so you have to do a lot of these, make no mistake about it. And then of those that turn into paying customers, that's even going to be a smaller effect about it, or that's going to be a smaller conversion number. Now, one of the things that I realized is that, overall satisfaction with the presentations was fair. Okay. But a lot of these, what I would do is I'd give out tchotchkes. And I'm going to start there because this is honest. I want to be really honest because I think my idea of tchotchkes now, or value adds, is different. But what I would have are everything from maybe a stress ball to chapstick. And, I invested some money. I'd have them with my brand and my name or contact information, and they were just cheap. They were very, very cheap because I didn't have a lot of money to invest in this. And sometimes what I learned is that I would put them out on the tables. I'd put like the worksheet and the tchotchke out, and I'd say, hey, use these to keep yourself entertained or whatever it was we're going through the presentation. And I found that my satisfaction with those presentations was always about the same, 7, 8, pretty satisfied. But inadvertently, I discovered, because I forgot, maybe got there late or whatever, that I started giving out those things at the very end. I would go through the whole presentation, kind of get through it, and I'd be like, hey, I've got these surveys, and I would love for you to fill them out. But on top of that, I've got some tchotchkes for everyone. Here's a keychain or whatever. Like I said, all just tchotchkes. I also have a worksheet, a handout here, so I'd hand that out as well. What I found is my survey numbers were much higher when I gave out those materials at the end, when people thought it was the end, because I think generally we are going to be satisfied with a presentation. And That's all well and good. And that kind of gets baked in. And most people, if a presentation is good, I think you should expect a 7 or 8. If you're not at a 7 or 8, then I think you need to look at the content. We can talk a little bit more about that later. I do a lot of presentations. I've got some tips on that. But, a 7 or an 8 or even a 9 or 10, I think, the presentation, the content should stand on its own. But when people get that baked in and say, hey, that was really good, and for what I expected, I got everything that I needed out of it, and here's my number. But when they get something extra, they bump up that satisfaction number. In their mind, they're much happier. And it's funny because I realized when I handed things out at the end, people would be like, oh, this is great. And you'd get a lot of oohs and ahs and people like acknowledging, yeah, this is awesome, because they didn't expect it. It's a value add above and beyond, and it's not necessarily baked into how they perceive your presentation, right? If I get it up front, all right, I know I've got this, all right, so this is part of this whole thing, and so it's just going to get plugged into that. But when it's past that, when I get the tchotchke, the giveaway, the value add, the worksheet, the resource, or whatever afterwards, now I'm a little more generous on how I think that presentation went. And that's not that I'm trying to get the score. This is how I discovered it. But what I'm trying to get is people to say to other people, hey, I went to this guy's presentation, or I saw this guy present. He was really good. And they're not processing in their mind exactly why, because the presentation was good, but the tchotchke was also good. Overall, they really, really enjoyed it. Now, they might without it, but what I found is if you're going to give away something, give it at the end, right? Because that helps. And now, if you think about it, and this is kind of maybe a weird analogy, but if you think about when you're watching an infomercial, right? They're talking about the value of the slicer or the dicer or the grass sprayer, whatever it is. At the very end, you're sold on it. You're said, yeah, for $30, I think this is a pretty good value. Yeah, that flashlight is a pretty good value, whatever it might be. But when they say, hey, now I'm going to give you a second one for free, don't you get tempted to make the call at that point? Don't you get tempted because you said, yes, I do think the value is good. But when they throw in something else that you didn't expect, free shipping on the next one, just pay separate handling, whatever it might be. Like all of a sudden, you step up to another notch in what you perceive out of this. And it's the same thing when we're presenting. Now, again, here is where I wouldn't want you to mimic what I'm doing right now. Because when you have 400 people or 500 people or 1,000 people in the presentation, I don't know that it's worth it or it's easy to give out tchotchkes, especially when you're at a conference and they aren't on the table already. What I don't want is people being like, hey, can you help pass around some of these things? Because now you're going to take up a half an hour time. The organizers aren't going to like that. You're not going to want to do that. But what I do is I usually will throw up on my last slide a digital resource, whether it's something that I put together, the presentation itself, the cheat sheet, a guide, a video, an unpublished webinar, whatever it is, right? It's going to be specific to what I'm presenting. And I'll say, hey, here's the URL, or email this email or text this to this number and you'll get a link to it, right? So I usually try to put that extra kicker at the end after the presentation is over. Hey, that's what I've got today. This is, how I'm concluding it. So this is how I think you make this part of your financial conversations. And on top of that, if you guys would like more, if you guys would like to see 10 other suggestions that I wasn't able to get into this presentation for side hustles or whatever it might be, text this number and it will send you it out. There's no follow-up. There's no email list. You're not going to get anything. I'm not going to solicit you for anything. It's just free. Or here's the URL. Go download it, right? So that's my way of giving that little extra value at the end of my presentations. And so if you have the opportunity to do that, that's just one technique I use to help raise people's satisfaction with what I'm presenting. So you can do it. I would also try to do it as much as possible with a survey to see how you're doing, because I think being self-aware about what your skills are in presenting is really, really important. And if you are struggling with it, there are ways to get better at it. I did a video about Toastmasters. That's something I got a lot of value out of myself, but maybe your speed isn't really good for public speaking. Maybe it's good for a certain audience, right? And so what I find is that people really struggle sometimes with how they think their presentations went, how their presentations or workshops or seminars went, and what people really think. So I would say if you aren't doing these regularly, if you're not being paid to do them, if you're not being flown to places to do them, if you are asking to present, it's one of those things where I would heavily use a survey. I will tell you right now, what's really awesome is I have been very, very fortunate to be paid to come to speak at events. I've been paid to be flown internationally to present. It's awesome. I really love it. I'm grateful for the organizations and the people that do it. I am grateful for the people that come to those. And I will tell you that when I work with those organizations, I always ask for feedback. And sometimes, sometimes those organizations, the conferences don't do them, or sometimes they're just very general about the conference afterwards. Some will do it about each speaker. Some will give a survey out electronically or paper wise after each presentation to figure out what they thought of the speaker. And some are very, very detailed. But I always, if they don't send it to me right away, I will usually email whoever my contact was and say, hey, listen, don't do it on my behalf, but if you do get any feedback, whether it's casual or people emailing it, or you actually do a formal survey, I would love to hear it to help me, because I think we can all improve. I'm certainly not a well-known speaker, but it's one of those things where if I can improve, if I can see some of the comments, and really the critical comments are the ones that are the most valuable, I would do that. And you can do that, like I said, on a half sheet of paper. If you need one, I can probably drum up my old one, but you can just, I would just Google post presentation survey or evaluation form, and I'm sure you can find one and make it your own. So that's my tip for helping raise the satisfaction of your participants at your presentations. I'll see you later.